Hey, what is happening everyone? Welcome back to another video, and this is the long-awaited ARK-4 custom firmware guide. In this video, I'll be showing you how to install it, how to set it up, and of course going through all the quality of life features that you can see on the right side. It's a lot of ground to cover, and we'll be trying to cover everything in this video. So if you are just interested in the installation process and the general setup, you can check out these chapters. Other than that, sit back, relax, and I'll show you how to update your PSP to the latest custom firmware. So let's get into it. Alright, so first things first, why ARK-4? Why should you care? What's the big deal about ARK-4? Well, to put it simply, it's the latest custom firmware for the PSP. It's still being maintained in 2024, which is amazing, and it's absolutely packed with quality of life features. So that said, if you're interested in a history event, we'll have a segment about it at the end of the video, but for now, I do want to go over a few things. First off, this new video format, feel free to pause at any moment as there will be various useful information placed on the right and bottom bars. As for the installation process, I went for a one-size-fits-all model that should work for like 95 to 98% of you. However, if you have a special rare case scenario with very weird errors, well, don't worry about it because we got you covered, and after going through the main installation process, I'll be showing you exactly where these errors are coming from and how to fix them. So everything that you need should be right here, as long as you're trying to install ARK on a PSP that isn't bricked. And no, we're not going to be covering the installation process for the Vita users, we're going to have a dedicated video for it sometime in the future. So for now, it's going to be all about the PSP and only the PSP. Now, as much as I want to get the installation process going, I'll be briefly going over the different types of file transfers for those beginners. If you already know what's up, you can skip ahead. Alright, so the first standard method of copying files to your PSP is by USB. For the 1000, 2000, 3000, and E1000 models, you'll need to get yourself a mini USB cable. And of course, for this process, with these models that I mentioned, you'll need to get yourself a memory card. And if you don't know what to get, I've got an entire video about it that you can find in the description down below. So go ahead and insert it, connect your USB cable, plug in the other end to your computer, and it should automatically switch to USB mode, in which it will show your memory card as a new storage device. As for the PSP Go, it uses a unique proprietary cable, but the cool thing about the PSP Go is it's got 16 GB of built-in storage, so you don't necessarily need a memory card. Like I said, you plug it in here, plug the other side to your computer, and it should automatically switch to USB mode. If it doesn't automatically switch, you can go ahead and help it out by going to the settings and USB connection. Now if you remember, the PSP Go does have an internal storage, and if you have another memory card connected, you'll have a total of 2. In which we can now see we have 2 different storage devices. Don't worry about it. Once we get to the copying process, you can actually copy to either one. There were some issues previously with one of the steps, but I talked to the devs, we got it fixed, so the whole process is going to be a breeze. So method 2 of transferring files would have to be through a micro SD card reader. So if you are using one of these micro SD card adapters, you can take out your SD card, connect it to your memory card reader, which might look like this, or something like this tiny one here, or your laptop or computer might have a micro SD or full-size SD card reader, and you'll see the exact same files that you saw when we plugged it in through USB. But of course with the added benefit of faster transfer speeds. Speaking of which, if you got a large SD card, like a 128GB, I would highly recommend that you get yourself a USB 3.0 card reader. That way you can utilize the full speed of the SD card and cut down on the transfer time drastically. If you're transferring files with a cheap USB 2.0 micro SD card reader, or through the cables, well, the transfer speeds are going to be extremely slow. So again, I will leave links in the description down below for other models where you can find decent quality USB 3.0 micro SD card readers. And one last thing I should mention, if you don't see this folder structure on your PSP's memory card, then you want to go ahead and format it. And this is the case usually if you just got your PSP. You'll want to go ahead and format your memory card by going to the settings, system settings, and format memory stick. And now it's good to go. Now let's say you don't have any of these options, but all you do have is a memory card. Well, your last option would have to be through Wi-Fi. And without going into too much detail, the fastest, simplest, and easiest way to do it is by opening a Wi-Fi hotspot on your phone with the following configuration, with no password and running on the 2.4 GHz band. And the reason is simple, the PSP is too old and is not compatible with modern Wi-Fi security protocols. And the majority, if not all of the modern devices nowadays, do not even offer an old Wi-Fi protocol of WPA1. The standard is WPA2, so knowing that, just set your Wi-Fi to the 2.4 GHz band with no password, and as a bonus tiny security measure, if your phone does have this option, go ahead and set a maximum connections of 1. Meaning once your PSP is connected, no other device can connect to your network. That way you can have that tiny bit of security. So knowing that, let's go ahead and turn on the Wi-Fi, head on over to the PSP, scroll all the way down to network settings, and hit OK. Then you want to select infrastructure mode and new connection. Then you want to hit scan. Now if you don't have your Wi-Fi switch on, then you want to go ahead and turn it on. For the 1000 models, it's on the bottom left. On the 2000 and 3000 models, it's on the top left. On the PSP Go, it's on the bottom left. And finally, for the E1000, well, you're out of luck. It doesn't have any Wi-Fi built in. So let's go back and hit scan again. And now we can see 2 different networks. We first have our PSP Wi-Fi that we just created, followed by a random Wi-Fi network that is grayed out and labeled as not supported, which is what you're most likely going to be seeing if you ever try to connect your home Wi-Fi. It may not show up, and if it does show up, well, it's going to tell you that it's not supported. So let's go ahead and connect to our PSP Wi-Fi. Right D-pad, right again, and again, and again, and one last time. And then you want to hit X. Then it will say save completed. We can go ahead and test the connection or hit back. Well, I'm just going to hit back for now. And that's pretty much it for the Wi-Fi. So we'll use this method for connecting and installing the ARK-4 installer if you decide to go with the online method, or in the future, once the new version of ARK is released, you can use the online updater, which is very nice. And now we are finally at the installation process, starting with the downloads. And just like with our other deep dive videos, we have an entire spreadsheet that goes over all the details. So go ahead and visit the link in the description down below, because inside you'll find all the download links, alternative download links, and a written form of this video, with of course some extra detail. And the only thing you need to know is that if you're already running 6.6.1 official firmware, then you can skip the process of downloading the official firmware file and the Kernel switch downgrader. And to check that, you want to go into your PSP, go to Settings, System Settings, and scroll all the way down to System Information. If you see version 6.61 and nothing else, you can go ahead and skip the Kernel switch downgrader and the official firmware file. And that's it. For everyone else, download those files anyways, and it'll just save the headache. Alright, so to download these files, go ahead and open up the links. Starting with ARK-4, you want to go ahead and scroll all the way down until you see ARK-4.zip. Click it once and it'll start downloading. Next, we have Kernel switch downgrader, and for this one, scroll down a tiny bit and download the latest version, which in our case is version 7.6. As for the 6.61 official firmware file, you want to download the corresponding one for your specific PSP. For the 1000, 2000, 3000, and E1000 Street models, they all share the exact same file. But when it comes to the PSP Go, it has its own file that is usually labeled as 6.61 Go. So the primary links are usually from archive.org. However, if the primary links are down, you can go ahead and visit the alternative links. Thankfully, we have 3 of them, and we can go ahead and get started with PS Punk, which is a fantastic PSP website with tons of resources. And here we have the 6.61 for the primary models and 6.61 for the PSP Go. If that doesn't work, you can go ahead and visit Darstern, and here you can find the file for the primary models, as well as the PSP Go version. And finally, if that doesn't work, you can go ahead and visit the Midnight channel. And to quickly find it, just Ctrl F and type 6.61. And right here you'll find the firmware 6.61 for the primary models and PSP Go firmware 6.61 for the PSP Go. And once you have everything downloaded, you should have a total of 3 files. ARK-4.zip, Kernel switch.zip, as well as the corresponding firmware file for your PSP. In my case, I downloaded both, so I'm going to delete one of them. Next, you want to go ahead and rename the 661.pbb file to eboot.pbp in all caps. Then you'll want to make a new folder and call it update, again in all caps. And then place eboot into the update folder. Next, connect your PSP, and if it doesn't automatically connect to USB mode, well, you can go ahead and help it out. So now we have the PSP storage on the right side and the files we downloaded on the left. Head on over to the PSP folder, go to Game, and drop the update folder into it. Now head back to your downloaded files and open up the Kernel switch. Inside you'll find a PSP folder, Game, and guess where this goes? It also goes into Game. Now again, head back to the PSP folder and open up ARK. And the first thing we'll copy over is the ARK loader into the Game folder. Then we have ARK_01234. This goes into the save data. Then open up the PSP folder and the Game folder on your memory card and copy the following files: ARK full installer and ARK CIPL. And while we're here, we're going to go ahead and copy a themes folder from the zip into the PSP folder on the memory card. And we're going to call it CL_themes. And you can leave everything else behind. We'll get back to a few of them in just a bit. And that's it. Now you should have everything that you need to finally do some stuff on the PSP. So head on over to your memory stick and first try to launch the 6.61 updater. If you get this error, that means you already have 6.61 installed, and it could be either custom or official firmware. And if you see 6.61 and nothing else, that means you already have official firmware and you don't have to reinstall it. If it says anything else with 6.61, such as Pro LME, Pro C, that means you got custom firmware and you need to reinstall it. So if that's the case and you got custom firmware of 6.61 that is not ARK, then you can go ahead and run the Kernel switch downgrader, which will bypass the checks and allow us to reinstall it. Hit X again, give it a couple minutes, and if you see the screen, everything from here on out should be a pretty smooth process. However, if you're getting any of these 3 errors, such as the DADADADA, the DRN, or the 9.90 your PSPs from the future, that means you got a special rare case scenario that might affect 2% of you out there, and if that's the case, then don't worry about it because we got you covered and we'll be showing you how to fix them right after we're done going through the main process. So anyways, hit start, right D-pad, accept, right D-pad again, and hit OK. And this should also take a couple minutes. Make sure your PSP is plugged in, fully charged up, or above 75%, because if your PSP turns off during this process, well, you're going to end up with a brick PSP, and that's no fun. And once it's complete, hit OK again, and it should restart back into the XMB. So now if we head back to the system information, it should say version 6.61. So now that we have 6.61 official firmware, we can proceed to the next step of installing ARK-4, starting by launching the ARK loader. And once it does its thing and restart back to the home screen, at this point we are running ARK live. And if we hit select, we should see this little menu right here, which is the VSH menu. So at this moment in time, our PSP is modded, but it's temporarily modded. So if we go and check in the system information, we can see that says 6.61 ARK live. Next, to make it permanent, we're going to run the ARK-CIPL flasher. And what this is the modern installation method of custom firmware. With old legacy firmware such as Pro-C and Pro-LME, the primary installation method was using Infinity. And if you have ever installed it in the past, you would remember how cumbersome it was. Now the screen will be slightly different if you have an older model, and we'll show you what that looks like in just a bit. But for now, you want to make sure that it says New CIPL and hit X. Now in the case of the 1000 model, you'll have two different options: regular CIPL and New CIPL. And what you want is the New CIPL. So go ahead and hit L to install the new ICPL, then you want to hit X. It's a pretty quick process, and it'll restart in 5 seconds. And at this point in time, you pretty much have yourself a permanently modded PSP, which if you check in system information, it should say 6.61 ARK-CIPL. However, what I like to do is to also run the full installer, which will move some of the ARK files into Flash 0, and it'll kind of make things a bit more tidy. So go ahead and hit install. And do note that in system settings, it will still say ARK-CIPL, but at this point, you're pretty much done. You now have yourself a fully modded PSP. However, we still have a whole lot to talk about, so let's continue. Starting with the offline update method. So let's say you're now in the future, you completed watching this video, you have all your plugins installed, all your games set up, as you would with any modded PSP. So how do you go about updating it? Well, first check what your current version is. Go ahead and hit select, and it should say ARK-4 42069, followed by the revision. In my case, I'm currently running R4, which is quite old considering all the new updates, because as of right now, we have R150. So to update it, we're going to have to go to Settings, ARK-4 Updater, and inside you'll find two options: Update via Internet and Update via Storage Media. And for this offline method, we're going to use Storage Media. Of course, we don't have any files, so let's go ahead and copy them over. So just like before, go ahead and plug in your PSP into your computer. And once again, we have the PSP storage on the right and the downloaded files on the left. And basically what you do is go ahead and download the latest version of ARK. And inside that zip file, the same zip file we downloaded to install ARK, will actually have an update folder at the top. And this time we're going to go ahead and replace the current eBoot on the update folder. So before we had the official 6.61 file, now instead we have the update file for the latest version of ARK-4. And now if we go ahead and try to update via storage media again, it will tell us that it has found an update of version 9.99. So once you launch it, it will start updating, and it should restart right back up into the XMB. Now if we go ahead and check by hitting select, we should see the new revision installed. Before we had R4, now we have R150. Very nice. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the online method of installing ARK-4. So just like before, open up your Wi-Fi hotspot and head on over to your PSP. Go to the Internet browser, hit the up D-pad to select the address bar and enter. Now what you want to type is http://psp.lucidgames.com and hit start. Type it exactly as shown, and if you did everything right, you should see the following page. So go ahead and hit triangle to remove the interface, and now we can go ahead and browse this awesome portal that Lucid made. He does have a YouTube channel, and I'll make sure to link it in the description down below. So this portal not only has the original firmware files, including the latest version of Corner Switch Downgrader, as well as the ARK-4 custom firmware, but also packed with content that you wish you had a time machine for, so you can go back in time and access them on the official PS Store. But we're getting sidetracked here. I mean, you even have demos for various different games, but again, we're getting sidetracked. And just like before, if you're already running 6.61 official firmware, then you can go ahead and skip this step. Otherwise, you can go ahead and get started by downloading the official firmware file for your corresponding PSP. It will ask you if you want to download it and the file size, and this one should take roughly around a minute or so. And once it's done, it should say download completed. Next, download Corner Switch Downgrader. This one is pretty quick. And to go back, by the way, you hit the left trigger. Now, jump into custom firmware and download the ARK-4 installer. Now this one took a while. It took like 2 minutes before it started downloading, and although the PSP looked frozen, it was in fact loading on the bottom right corner. So now if we head over to the memory stick, we should see all the files that we have downloaded: Corner Switch Downgrader, the ARK-4 installer, and the official update file. And once again, we can go ahead and try to run the update file, and if our PSP is already running 6.61, but it's on a custom firmware, then we can go ahead and run the Corner Switch Downgrader. Hit X, X again. It'll take around a minute before it boots back up, but once it does, we'll have the installer ready to go. Right D-pad, accept, right D-pad again, have your PSP fully charged up and plugged into the power, because if your PSP turns off while it's updating, guess what? You're going to end up with a brick PSP. It's almost like I have deja vu. Once that's done, we can go ahead and run the ARK installer. And you'll notice this one is a little bit different, as the one we downloaded from the portal is basically an all-in-one package that self-extracts once you run the first file. And it will give you the ARK loader, the full installer, and the CIPL flasher. So let's go ahead and run ARK loader. Followed by the CIPL flasher. Now depending on which model you have, if you have the option for the regular and the new CIPL, you definitely want to use the new CIPL, so hit L and then hit X. And finally, let's finish this off by installing the ARK full installer. Hit X. It'll do its thing and quickly put you back in on the XMB. And that's it. So now we have ARK-4 installed through the online method. Now, if for some reason Lucid's website is down, there's another one that you can visit by this username. However, the options here are pretty limited. There's only one option, and that is to download the ARK-4 installer. So you cannot upgrade or reinstall 6.61 through this portal. Now, if we go back to the memory stick, we'll see the ARK-4 installer. And once we run it, it will go through the exact same extraction process and throw us back into the home screen, where we'll find the ARK loader and the ARK CIPL flasher. Now you'll notice that the full installer is missing, but that's alright. We can actually live without it. And the nice thing is about both the Lucid portal and the other portal that I just showed you, they both do extract the ARK-4 save data file. So now if we go ahead and hit select, we can see that we're running revision 7, which is pretty old. So it's a perfect time to show you how to update it through the online updater. So go ahead and open up ARK-4 updater in the settings and update via internet. It'll tell you that there's a new version, hit X, and it should automatically start downloading. And once it's done, you'll get this screen, so go ahead and hit X, and it should take only a couple seconds to do before it throws you back into the home screen. And that's it. You can go ahead and select, and you should see a new revision number. Again, it was R7, now it's R150. Nice. So, that's pretty much it for the installation process. So let's go ahead and get started with the rarest case scenario that might help like one person out of everyone who's watching this video. So right now we have a PSP with a newer motherboard revision, and it's running 1.50 official firmware. When you go ahead and run the updater for the 6.61, well, you get a DRNFFFFFFX error. So why is there a problem? Well, it's because 82 and 86 motherboards out of the box are not compatible with the 1.50 official firmware, meaning that something had to be patched, and in this case it was the ID storage. However, this ran just fine until Sony released the 3.30 official firmware, where it would check for ID storage, and if things didn't look good because it was either patched or corrupted, well, it would refuse to update. And the last two letters would tell us exactly where our problem is, but thankfully you don't have to worry about it. All you need to know is that if you have a DRNFFFFFFX error, that means you have an ID storage problem, and all you need to do is download a package from this website, which is the psdevwiki.com. And they have a great write-up on all these errors. Basically, it goes over everything that I'm talking about in great detail. And the best part is that they have upgrade kits for each problem. So you can easily fix these problems by just downloading the package, following the steps, and you should be good to go. So go ahead and plug in your PSP and visit the link in the description down below. Scroll down to the preparation section and download the 1.50 official firmware update kit. And you can either download it from Google or Mega, whichever works for you. And for this one, it's pretty simple and straightforward. All you have to do is open up the zip file and copy over all the contents to the root of your PSP's memory card. And once you're done copying everything, head on back to your PSP, and we'll get started by running Hellcat's recovery flasher, making sure that it's the 1.5 only version. If it's not, then you downloaded the wrong zip file. So go ahead and run it. Once you're in, you'll get this little warning, and you can choose either of the bottom ones. And at this point, you want to make sure that your battery is fully charged, plugged in, and that the target firmware is selected at 5.00, in which we'll go ahead and drop down to the second option that says install custom firmware of version selected above, and hit X. It'll give you some more warnings, so hit X again. It's going to take a couple minutes, and once it's done, you can hit any button, power it back on, and now if we go ahead and hit the select, we'll see that we have a VSH menu, and if we go ahead and check in the system settings, we'll see that we now have 5.00 M33.6, which is an old custom firmware. So what we have done so far is jump from 1.50 official firmware, and then we upgrade it to 5.00 M33 custom firmware, and what that will allow us to do is to be able to run these other apps. So let's go ahead and get started by running PSP ident, because at this stage we're going to go ahead and fix the ID storage issue. So here's how you do it. First, we need to identify which motherboard revision that we currently have, and what you want to take note of is the TA revision. In our case, it's the TA82. Once you have taken note of that, we can go ahead and exit the program, and now we can go ahead and run the key cleaner. It'll give you a little warning if you're below 75%, but we're going to go ahead and continue anyways. Now, although key cleaner can identify the motherboard correctly, if your ID storage is corrupt enough, it can sometimes get it wrong, so it's good to double check with PSP ident. Go ahead and hit X to analyze the keys, and And we can see once again that it has identified the motherboard as a TA82/86. And we can actually triple check by hitting square, where it will show us a little picture of where you can check your motherboard version. Right around there. If you have no writing, then you have a TA79 or an 81. And in our case, if you see IC103 printed upside down, then you have an 82 or an 86. And once you're ready and you have triple checked, you can go ahead and confirm which model you have. In our case, we'll hit X. And you'll notice that key 5 has failed, which is exactly what we're looking to fix. Give it a sec and it'll tell you that it's not patched, so we can either leave it or fix it with X. And of course, we want to fix it. So hit X, fixing key is done, and now we can go ahead and return back to the main menu. Then go ahead and run it again, hit X, X again, and now we're going to go ahead and unpatch the key by hitting X. And now just hit O for exit. And now if we did everything correctly, we should hopefully be able to run the 6.61 update without any problems. And there we go. We can finally go ahead and install 6.61 official firmware. And once it's done, you can go ahead and hit O to restart. We should be back in the home screen, in which if we check the system information, we should finally see version 6.61. And that's how you fix the DRN issue. Now for these two errors, DADADADA and 9.90, we can actually follow the same exact steps to get past them. And basically what we got here are two custom firmware PSPs, one running 3.03 OEA and one with 5.50 Gen D. And basically at a time where it was hard to actually downgrade and upgrade as you wish, like we do today, if you accidentally upgraded your PSP to an official firmware, well, you pretty much had to wait for a new patch to come out who knew when. So to stop people from accidentally upgrading their PSP, the custom firmware developers have implemented some safeguards. Now for the 9.90 error, there are two ways of going about it. And I'll show you both, because why not? So for this one, I'm going to go ahead and hit select and shut down our device. Then while holding R, we're going to go ahead and power it on to enter the recovery menu. Then we'll drop down to advanced and toggle USB for flash 0. Once that's done, we can go ahead and plug our PSP, and then we should see something different that is not our memory card, which is one of the couple storage banks in the device. So what you want to go ahead and do is go to VSH, etc, and open up the version.txt. And inside of here, you should see release 9.90. And I guess you know what to do. Go ahead and change it to something like 5.50, something that is below 6.61. And basically hit save and close it. Now we can go ahead and exit, and we should be able to run the update file just fine. So run through the usual setup, and you should be good to go. And lastly, we can go over the steps that will fix your DADADADA issue, as well as the 9.90 error. So let's go ahead and do that. And for this one, we'll need to plug in our PSP. Head on over to PSP Wiki, again, link in the description, scroll down to preparation, and this time we'll download the old custom firmware update kit, not the 1.5. We've already done that. We want the first option, and you can download it through Google Drive or Mega. And once you have it downloaded, go ahead and open up the zip and copy over all the contents onto the root of your PSP storage. Exit out, head on over to the memory stick, and you can skip the key cleaner as well as the PSP ident. All we need to run is the Hellcat recovery flasher, making sure it's the non-1.50 version. If it does, you downloaded the wrong zip file. Once it loads, it'll give you this little warning. You can choose either of the bottom options. And once you're in, you want to make sure that your battery is fully charged up, plugged in, and that the target firmware is set to 5.00. And once you're good to go, select the second option, which is install custom firmware of the version selected above, and hit X. Accept the warnings, hit X again. Once it starts, give it some time. It's going to take a couple minutes, and if everything went smoothly, it'll tell you press any button to shut down. Once the power button stops flashing, go ahead and power it back on, go through the setup screen, and now if we go ahead and hit the select menu, we can see that we have M33 VSH Menu, and heading on over to the system settings, we should see 5.00 M33 6. So everything went smoothly, and now we should be able to run the 6.61 updater without any problems. And if you get this error, well, you can go ahead and roll back the video to one of the previous chapters. I'm just going to run through it real quick. If you want more details, again, watch the previous chapter. I'll start by running PSP ident, take a note of my PSP revision, which is TA82, exit the program, then I'm going to run key cleaner. It's going to give me a warning. I'm just going to hit continue, analyze the keys, hit X for 82. It's going to tell me that I have an error with my 5 key, which I'll go ahead and hit X to fix it. Return back to the main menu, analyze the keys again, hit X, and X one last time to unpatch the key. And once I'm done patching and unpatching the key, I should be able to run the 6.61 updater without any problems. And that should pretty much cover like 99% of you out there. Unless of course you have a brick PSP and a extra special case scenario, well then you can go ahead and visit the Discord and I can try to help you out. And once it's done, you restart and you should have yourself 6.61 official firmware, which of course you can go ahead and roll back the video to the part where I show you how to install ARK-4. We have shown you how to do it online and offline. Now let's go ahead and go through all the fancy features, starting with the VSH menu. So we have exit, reset VSH. This is the VSH, by the way, the whole interface. Reset device, suspend, which is sleep, shut down, and then we have the recovery menu. Now we'll come back to this because we want to go ahead and upgrade it to something a whole lot nicer and a whole lot more useful. So for now, let's finish going over the VSH. What you see here is the simple, and this is the advanced. And starting from the top, you have the USB device. So right here, you can actually select which storage device on the PSP you want to access. You have flash 0, flash 1, flash 2, flash 3, the UMD, and again, the memory stick. And if you access these flashes, they will actually be on read-only by default. So if you want to edit them and break your PSP, you can disable it and then hook it up to your computer and then break something. Next, we have the ISO video mount. So if you have any UMD video ISOs, they will show up here. At the moment, we don't, so we cannot cycle through them. But there's a better way, which we'll talk about in just a bit, for browsing your various UMD videos. Then we have some customization for your menu. I like to have the background color on black and the foreground color on red. The font is up to you. You can change it or leave it as is. There are a ton of font options, so you can go crazy with it. Then we have the menu design, and yeah, just keep it on you. Main menu allows you to select which default menu you want to have, the simple or the advanced one that we're looking at. You can also convert your original PSP battery into a Pandora right from this menu and change it back to normal. Pretty nice if you ask me. And right here is something that you're going to definitely want to do when you get a Japanese unit, and then it's to switch around the X and O buttons. Japanese units have the O as OK and X as back, where normally on North American models, where X is OK and O is back. Then you can change your VHS region, but we'll come back to it in just a bit, so I can chapter this video correctly. Same thing with this one, we'll come back to it in just a bit. This one, you might as well go ahead and activate. It will allow you to run Flash on your web browser, which we'll have a video on in the future, where I show you a bunch of Flash games that you can run on your PSP. Reset ARK settings, boot random ISO, and go back. Now, one cool thing about this menu here, you can actually go ahead and hide the options that you don't want to see. So if I go ahead and hit L, it will actually hide those menu options. So I can make this menu exactly how I want it, and only have the options that you frequently use. And to reset it back to default, you can hit R, and everything will come back on screen. Personally, I probably have only these options on, and that's about it. Speaking of these options are going to be extra useful when you want to run region-locked accessories, apps, or in my case at the moment, UMDs. So I currently have a Japanese unit, and this UMD is a North American video, which if I go ahead and insert it, I'll get this pop-up telling me that the UMD disk cannot be read because the region is incorrect. So what I could do on the fly real quick is to go ahead and set my UMD region to America. And this should allow me to instantly be able to run my UMD without having to even restart my PSP, which is pretty damn awesome if you ask me. On previous custom firmware such as Infinity, you would have needed an entire plugin just to get this running. And having it included in ARK-4 is just absolutely fantastic. Again, quality of life features. And we're just getting started. As for the VSH region, this is useful for when you want to run applications that are region locked. For example, if you have a Japanese 1-seg TV tuner and your PSP is an American model, then you won't have this option right here. So you can go ahead and change it inside the region options here. In my case, I'm going to try Korea. And once you do, you want to go ahead and manually reset the VSH. And we can see that we have TDMB, which is a Korean compatible version of the Japanese 1-seg TV tuner. Extra useful stuff. So about that recovery menu, we'll want to go ahead and copy one last set of files from our computer, which will make our life a whole lot easier and a whole lot fancier. So we'll go ahead and plug in our PSP, and this time around, on the PSP storage device, we'll go to PSP, Game, and with the ARK-4 zip open, we'll go to PSP and copy over ARK_DC. Now we can exit the zip file and copy over the 6.61 official firmware file to the root of the memory card, making sure that this time it's called 661.pbp. So head on over back to your PSP and go ahead and run Despertar del Cementerio. Go ahead and hit start, and it'll do its thing before restarting. Hit X to exit, and we are good to go. Now if you go ahead and visit the recovery menu, you'll notice that it still looks the same. And that's because we're accessing it through the VSH menu. So let's say your PSP is not functioning correctly, and this is a cold boot. What you could do, among the many shortcuts we'll talk about, you can go ahead and hold L while turning on your PSP. And what you should see is this recovery menu. Yes, this is the same menu that you'd see with a magic memory stick and a Pandora battery. This doesn't mean that you don't need a Pandora battery if your PSP is hard bricked, but if you're lucky and you have a soft brick, then you can go ahead and use this. Now every time you launch it, it will have a different color, so we're going to go ahead and restart it to get a better visual. So the first option is to install 6.61 ARK. The next one is to install 6.61 official firmware. The other one is NAND options. We can dump the NAND, hardware information about your motherboard and whatnot, and a very useful option which is booting 6.61 ARK from memory stick, which is like running a virtual temporary version of your system firmware, kind of like portable Windows. Again, this is all recovery stuff, and I'm having you do it early on in case you do anything wrong and you have to recover your PSP. If you have this, it will make your life a whole lot easier. So with that said, let's get out of here and take a look at the Extras tab, which has custom firmware settings, plugin manager, and the custom launcher. So we'll start with custom firmware settings. Now you've probably seen this menu before on my storage maxing video, but basically here are my recommended options. USB charge always on, even though I rarely use it. Overclock always on for maximum speed. Power saving disabled. Balanced energy disabled. Auto boot launcher disabled. Force extra memory is only useful for those homebrews that require it, usually emulation, and this option will not be available on the 1000 models because it came with only one bank of memory, while the other models have 2 banks that we can tap into. And for this one, I'd recommend you only have it set to homebrew. Memory stick speed up, I just have it disabled. In my testing, it doesn't do anything, and in some very specific instances, it slows things down. Now for Inferno Cache, it's kind of a debated topic. I usually have it as off, but if you'd like to get a tiny bit of speed boost for very specific games, so I'll probably be visiting this sometime in the future, you can have it set to LRU. Some games may not like it, where they won't load correctly, others could definitely benefit from it. Personally, I like to just have it off, and I've never had an issue with it. You can skip the Sony logos if you want to speed up the time for loading in your PSP and loading games, which are the classic intros. It's really up to you. If you want nostalgia, keep it off, otherwise turn it on for a quick boot up. This one is for hiding the icons when you browse your games. You can keep it as off. Hide MAC address, it's up to you. Hide DLC, again at the moment I don't use it, so I just have it as off. Otherwise, if you have lots of DLC and it's cluttering things up, you can turn it on. Turn off LEDs is self-explanatory. It turns off the power, memory stick, and the Wi-Fi LED indicators. Now when it comes to the disable UMD drive option, in the past it's been said that it would save battery life. However, I did test it in my battery testing video, and the results were negligible. However, there are some cases where you want to disable it, and the option of having it built in is pretty great. If you're using an old custom firmware like Infinity in the past, you would have needed another plugin just to disable the UMD drive. And I'm told by the devs that ARK-4 does the action of disabling the UMD drive at the kernel level, so it doesn't even load into the system when it restarts. Perhaps I got a UMD that I want to store inside my PSP, but I don't want it to spin up every time I want to turn it on, and I'm going to be accessing it occasionally, so that's one case scenario. Next up we have the disable analog stick option, and this one is extremely useful in the cases where your analog stick is drifting or is simply missing, which in that case it will also equal to drifting. So sometimes you want to play a game and your stick is for the camera but you're not using the camera too much, well you can go ahead and disable it. And finally we have QA flags, and you can turn that on or off, it doesn't matter. All it does is enable the debug settings in the XMB. Now when it comes to the custom firmware settings for the PSP Go, there are 3 additional options. The first one being disable pause on the PSP Go. If you didn't know, the PSP Go has a pause feature, and it will basically allow you to pause your game, shut down your PSP, and resume it at any time. It only works for one game, so you cannot do multiple games at the same time. So you can disable it from here. Next, we have old plugin support for the PSP Go, and what this does for old plugins is redirect MS0 to EF0. MS0 being the external memory card, while EF0 is the internal storage. So for now, you can set it to always. And finally, we have prevent hibernation deletion on the PSP Go. And what this does is stop you from deleting your hibernation file, which will look a little something like this. So let's go ahead and launch a game. And now let's say we want to pause the game. So click OK, and it should say, please wait. It should finish loading before throwing you back into the XMB. Now if I scroll up, you can see that we have resume game, and it'll show us that it's Tekken 6, but it also shows us the time that we last played it, which is very handy. So that option will stop you from deleting this from here. Now, you're probably wondering, if you've ever done custom firmware in the past, you would know that the PSP Go is kind of finicky when it comes to custom firmware and having the pause feature working. And as you can see, we are running ARK, and the pause feature is indeed working, which is fantastic. That being said, it will only work if you have the following settings turned off. The first one is to set Force Extra Memory to disabled and Inferno Cache to off. Once you have those set, the resume feature should work just fine. There we go. So now let's move on and talk about plugins, which is something that you definitely want to do if you're modding your PSP. But in order to show you how to install plugins through the different various methods, we're going to need to download a couple plugins. And what better plugin to install other than CXMB, which will allow you to run all these awesome custom themes out there. And I don't know about you guys, but that's the first plugin I install whenever I get my hands on a modded PSP. So here's how it usually goes. You search for a plugin, or you hear about it, you look it up, you download it, you open up the zip, you read the README file, you copy over whatever folders or files you have into the SE plugins folder, which is where all your plugins are going to sit. And that's pretty much step 1. Now the plugin here is not going to work until we create a text file called plugins.txt. So let's go in and break it down real quick. So starting at the top, we have a comment, or really a title or description of whatever you have under it. It's just a line of code that is ignored by the software and only read by humans, you and I. I mean, unless AI takes over the world. But anyways, it's very useful if you have a lot of plugins and you want to categorize them. You can add a hashtag, space, and then write whatever you want. That way you can keep things nice and neat. Moving on to the line of code. So it's made up of 3 portions. It's made of where you want to run it, where the file is located, and if you want it to be on or off. The VSH is basically the home screen. Game is basically games and homebrews, and POPs is for the internal PS1 emulator. And if you're coming from an old custom firmware, you'll remember that you actually had to have 3 different text files for each of these, which was honestly pretty annoying. However, thankfully with ARK, everything is contained into one text file or configuration file, and it saves a lot of time, keeps things nice and neat, and overall just really easy to maintain. Now there are actually several more with ARK-4, but we'll get back to them in just a bit. Moving on, we have MS0. Basically, that is your location of your SD card, or EF0 is the internal storage for the PSP Go, because if you guys remember, this thing has 16 GB of internal storage, as well as an external memory card. So if you're using the memory card and you're placing these files on your memory card, then you want to use MS0. Otherwise, if you're using only the internal storage, then you can put EF0. And of course, that just explains where the path is going. So SE plugins /cxmb folder, and then the cxmb prx file. And finally, we can tell it on or off. And again, the nice part about ARK-4, there's a ton of customizability when it comes to plugins, where you run them, how you run them. You can even set them up to run per app, or should I say per game. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. All you need to know is you have a plugins.txt file in the corresponding location of your memory card, and depending on where you have your files, you put EF0 or MS0. And of course, you have to decide where your plugin is going to run. Don't overload your system by running the plugins everywhere at the same time. In our case, we have CXMB, and it's a theme manager, and this thing should only run in the VSH, which is the home screen. So there's no need to run it in the game, there's no need to run it in the PS1, all we need to run it is in the home screen, and that's it. So what I could do here, CXMB, themes. So let's go ahead and save everything, and since we're not going too deep into the plugin, download whatever theme you like from PS Punk or any other source, making sure that it's a CTF theme and not a PTF theme. CTF themes are the fancy ones, PTF are the regular ones, and if you want to run the PTF themes, then you'll want to disable CXMB. So once you have picked your theme, head on over to your PSP, open up the PSP folder, theme, and drop your CTF theme right in there. So now we can go ahead and unplug, and head on over to Extras and Plugin Manager. We'll see that it shows up right in there, with all the details that we have included, alongside of where it's running, its status, which you can turn on and off, or remove. And now if we go in and jump into the system settings, we'll see that our new theme that we have installed shows up right in there. So go ahead and hit apply, click OK, and now we have successfully installed a plugin. Now let's say you're coming from an old custom firmware that has those 3 files, which is the POPs, game, and the VSH text files. Now of course you could rewrite everything by hand, or you could use the fancy built-in feature in the ARK VSH menu called Import Classic Plugins. And what this will do is take all your text files from that old custom firmware and rewrite them into a new plugins file that works with ARK-4, which is fantastic because if you have a lot of plugins and you don't feel like working on them, you just want to get things running real quick, well, guess what? ARK-4 again comes in clutch with these awesome little features. And it's getting even better with every update. So once you do that, it will actually restart your PSP, create the file, and that option will actually disappear. That being said, you want to be careful of this option because if you already have your plugins file set up and you run the script here, well, it's going to override your plugins file. So in order to avoid that, you want to go ahead and select it and then hit L, which again, as we have mentioned before, it will hide that option from the menu. As if we go ahead and check in the plugins manager, we'll see that there's an example, this time showing us that we can actually set up plugins with individual games. Which you're probably asking, how do you do that? Well, glad you asked. Well, we can finally go ahead and run the custom launcher under the extras section. And once again, if you don't have the ARK_0123 in the save data folder, then you'll end up with an old school file browser when trying to open the custom launcher. Alright, so if you're launching these for the first time and you got nothing going on, then you're not going to see a whole lot. So just a heads up, here's what it should look like once you have everything populated. This is the main game screen. By default, when you launch the custom launcher, it will open up the game section, which will have 3 different slides. The first one being ISOs, second one being homebrew, and the third one being PS1 games. So that's what it's going to look like once you load your SD card. So like I said, when you first launch it by default, it opens up the games page, which as you can see, currently on this PSP, all we have is a single game, which is Sega Rally Revo. And hitting triangle allows us to navigate the different tabs, made up of games, files, network, custom firmware settings, and yes, these are the exact same settings that you see on the home screen, so we're not going to go over them too much. Plugins, again, same thing, settings for the custom launcher, and finally, exit. On the game section, depending on what we have selected, we can hit L. We'll get a little menu where we could do a couple things, including viewing the information, the game name, the file path, the file size, and the game ID, which is very important. We can also rename the file, and of course we can go ahead and delete it. So before we go ahead and browse all the different features, let's go ahead and jump into the file section and head on over to the SE plugins folder. Now I went ahead and loaded up some extra plugins, so let's go ahead and give them a try. So let's get started by installing Hold Plus, which will allow us to turn off our PSP display and drop our clock speeds when we go ahead and drop it to the hold position. But it also has one extra feature that is a must for me, and that is enabling full brightness, which by default the PSP only does when you have it plugged into power. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So go ahead and select the plugin you want installed and hit X, and this little menu will pop up that says Install Plugin, which is very convenient. And inside we have all the different variants of install methods for which application, which game, and what different category you want it to be running in. And under it, we'll see different options for different install methods, like I mentioned before. ARK-4 is pretty phenomenal. It gives you tons of options compared to old custom firmware. So the first option is Always, and this will run the plugin at all times in every single application or game. As long as the PSP is on and running normally, you're going to have the plugin on, and you definitely don't want to do that on every single plugin, because some of these plugins will definitely crash your system if they're running in the wrong place. For example, CXMB is meant for the VSH, it's not meant for a game, so why enable it and cause issues? Maybe you want a brightness plugin enabled, and you always want that high brightness mode on your PSP, which I definitely do, so I might use this option. Next, we have Game, and this one includes both Homebrew, ISO, and UMD games, pretty straightforward. Then we have POPs, which is PS1, VSH, or the XMB, or the home screen, UMD/ISO specifically, Homebrew, Game ID, which we'll get back to in just a bit. This option is pretty awesome. It lets you run specific plugins for specific games. For example, maybe you want to run the cheat engine for GTA and only GTA, which with ARK-4 you can do. Very nice. And finally, we have Load Start Module, and this will allow us to run the plugin right here, right now in Custom Launcher. Now, of course, this is not going to work exactly as you expect. For example, if you're running a plugin for the XMB, like CXMB for the themes, you're not going to really see anything. So let's go ahead and give it a try. And remember, we're trying out Hold Plus. At the moment, if we go ahead and hit Hold, nothing happens other than the button is not working. But now if we go ahead and load Start Module, and we do the same thing, we'll notice that the screen turns off, all the lights turn off, the buttons stop working, the CPU speed drops, and the best part, other than not having to worry about the power button sleeping, because they also fixed that with this plugin, it also enables that full brightness mode that you get when you have the PSP plugged in. I'm a sucker for high brightness, and high brightness just makes my life a whole lot better. So once again, in order to install plugin, navigate to it in the file browser inside the custom launcher, select the plugin PRX, and select exactly where you want it to run. In our case, CXMB goes into VSH, and this one we're going to tell it to go in MS0 with the first option. If it is a PSP Go, it's going to give you an option of AF0. Again, you don't have to worry too much about where it goes. As long as you have the custom launcher and the plugin manager, you're going to pick up on things pretty quickly. Next, we got categories, and I'm going to go ahead and install this in the home screen as well. PRX Shot, which is a screenshot tool, and this one, I'm going to actually want to go ahead and run it at all times, because I want to take screenshots in every single application that I have. Next, we got Day Viewer. This one goes in the VSH. Yeah, it's kind of redundant, but I like it. And for the Hold plugin, well, depending on where you want to use it, maybe you want to use it in the VSH, or maybe you want to use it in a specific game. I'm going to go for Always as well. Now, to run a plugin only for a specific game, you want to go ahead and head back to the game section, select the game that you want, hit L, and then View Info. Then you want to scroll down to Game ID and hit X. And now, if we go ahead and jump back to the file browser, SE Plugins, select the plugin you want, and then select Game ID, which will open up a text editor with the Game ID already pasted in, which is fantastic. All we have to do now is go ahead and hit select or OK, select the path that we want it, and we're done. Pretty straightforward. Now, since this is a fully fledged file browser, we can actually go ahead and open up the text file and take a look at what we have here, which is actually pretty intuitive. It allows us to edit each section as a separate line. And of course, right down here, we got Day Viewer set to run on the Sega Rally Revo Game ID, which is pretty awesome. Now, of course, you can have multiple lines running at the same time of the same plugin. So if you have it set on Always and then you do Game ID, well, it's going to run Always because you have a line that says the plugin will run on Always. So make sure you delete or disable one of these if you don't need it. And finally, for plugins, if we go ahead and move on to the plugins tab, we basically have the plugin manager right inside the custom launcher, where we can go ahead and remove, disable, or enable. And that's pretty much it for the plugins. I went over everything, showed you how to install it through the advanced way, or the manual way on PC, showed you how to convert your old Infinity custom firmware into the new ARK format, as well as showing you how to install it and set specific configurations for each plugin using the custom launcher, for both different categories and specific games. So now let's move on and finish off the different features of custom launcher. So let's quickly finish off the file browser by checking out the wide range of file support that is included in the custom launcher file browser. So first we have INI files. Just like with the text editor, we can edit line by line, which is awesome, and navigating through it is a breeze. Again, we have easy plugin support. We can launch specific ISOs directly from here. We can also view images. Yep, don't know what's going on here, but it's a pretty big image. We can also run the various eboots, as well as previewing MP3 files. Alright, BMP files. Yep, that's my screenshot using PRX shot. Text editor, MP4 files, which cannot be played here, but that's alright. We also have zip file support, which is fantastic. We can easily extract it where we want, as well as different custom launcher themes. So once we run it, it will ask us if we want to install it, or just use the theme without installing. But yeah, like I said, it's a pretty fleshed out system, and most of it was actually originally done for the PS Vita, but we'll talk more about that in just a bit. Now, other than the file support, we do have the usual options that you can access with the left trigger. You have copy, cut, delete, rename, create new folder or file, and we'll get back to that in just a bit. USB enable or disables, which will allow you to access your memory card right from the custom launcher, as well as accessing your external and internal memory cards, of course, if you have a PSP Go. We also have UMD access, so if you have a UMD running, you can actually browse some of the contents. And for the FTP, well, we'll get back to that one in just a bit. Two main things I want to focus on are the copy, cut, and paste options, as well as creating new folders and files. So if you're looking to copy over a folder, it may not be obvious, but you actually have to select it using the square button. Once you have the files and folders that you want selected, you can go ahead and hit left trigger and perform a copy or cut. Now let's say we want to paste this inside, let's say, the PSP folder. We go into it, and once we're ready, we can go ahead and hit paste. It'll start copying, and it will give you some information until it's of course all done and ready to go. Now the next thing I want to go over is creating new files or folders. And for the folder, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's just going to give you a quick editor and allow you to create a new folder. However, if you're looking to actually create a text file or a configuration file or an INI file, well, for those, it's pretty straightforward. You can give it the file extension right in here, hit enter, and there you have it. So right now it's empty. So how do you actually add extra lines? Well, you go ahead and hit square. It'll tell you new line, enter whatever you want, and there you go. And you just keep doing the same thing until you have all the lines that you want. Now, what if you're looking to delete or copy the lines? Well, what you can do is hit the right or left D-pad to scroll through the options. So let's give this a try. Copy, and then let's say new line, and there we go. It just copies whatever we had straight into the text editor once we create a new line. Very nice. So that's the file browser, pretty fleshed out to be honest. So moving on, we're going to go ahead and skip right through the network. We'll get back to that in just a bit. Custom firmware settings, we already went through that. It's basically the exact same settings, except in the custom launcher. Plugins, again, same thing. And the last item here would be the settings for the custom launcher itself. So here are my recommended settings. Font style to 4, show file size enabled. For the menu animation, there are a couple of options, and they're pretty cool to go through. But my favorite one would have to be, not this one, nope, this one right here, which is no. Next, for the default menu, I would say files would be good. Show FPS, because why not? Text glow, I like to have that at 1. The screensaver size at 1 minute. And basically what that would do is remove everything that's on screen and just let you enjoy whatever animation that you have, which is pretty chill. Display battery percentage, again, why not? And finally, system menu size, I prefer to have it on small. And what that would do is turn these large tabs into little tabs. They can quickly scroll through and take up less screen space. And since we're on the topic of customizing custom launcher, well, you guys remember we copied over a folder that used to be called themes that we renamed to CL_themes inside the PSP folder? Well, that is exactly what we're going to go through right now. So in the ARK-4 zip file, it comes bundled with a plethora of different custom launcher themes that you can go through and try out for yourself. In my experience, the nicest ones were Ubuntu, which you can preview or install, or preview and use it without installing. We already saw that one before. And the two macOS ones, which I have to say are pretty nice. So yeah, feel free to go through it, pick which one you like, and if you're interested, there's actually a full tutorial that you can find on how to create your own custom launcher theme. So if you're interested, I'll leave a link for it again in the spreadsheet. So yeah, now let's go ahead and talk about the networking aspect of custom launcher. So of course, have your phone's Wi-Fi hotspot ready and head on over to the network section and hit X. And now, as you can see, we have an IP address for an FTP server that is running from the PSP, which of course can access on your phone, your laptop, basically any device that is connected to the same Wi-Fi network as your PSP. So in the case of our computer, we're going to run an application that is called WinSCP, which is like FileZilla, but without the malware. And we'll go ahead and switch the protocol to FTP, set it to anonymous login, and where it says hostname is where you're going to type in your little IP address that is shown on the custom launcher. So in our case, it's 192.168.23.15. And we might as well go ahead and hit save and call it PSP. And now if we log in, and if everything is running correctly, we can see that as soon as we connected on our computer, a bunch of things happen on the screen here, which is basically a log of what's going on. And guess what? We pretty much have our SD card showing up on our laptop wirelessly. Very nice. And the best part is, of course, you can copy over files to it, you can remove files, you pretty much have full access to your memory card wirelessly. Now, of course, the transfer speeds are not going to be amazing. The PSP is pretty damn old, but it's pretty useful nonetheless. But one of the coolest use case scenarios is with the following feature. So here we have another PSP, and you can probably guess where we're going with this. We're going to head over to Files, and we'll go ahead and hit left trigger and go to FTP, where we can go ahead and type the same IP address that is on this PSP, and guess what? We can transfer files across PSPs using the exact same method, which is pretty cool if you ask me. And once again, you can transfer files between your phone or tablet or whatever device that has an FTP application and move files in and out of your PSP wirelessly, which is pretty handy. And while we're here, remember that part where I was talking about browsing multiple UMD videos? Let's say I have 50 UMD videos. Instead of having to scroll through them through this menu here, my preferred method is to browse them through the custom launcher. So it'll go to ISO, video, and in my opinion, this is a whole lot better than having to scroll through a tiny list of text horizontally just to get to the UMD that you want. With this one, you have a preview, you can see the file name, and the best part, you can even categorize them through a bunch of different folders, which is very nice. And I believe that is all for the custom launcher. So let's exit out. We have a restart, we have a shutdown, or a simple exit. Moving on, we got shortcuts, and we got a ton of them, and they are very important and very useful when you need them. Again, all of this will be in the spreadsheet, and you can find a lot of what I'm talking about on the official ARK-4 wiki page. One of the first shortcuts is to jump straight into the custom launcher, and you do that by holding left trigger, right trigger, down, and start. And just like that, we jump straight into it. Select, of course, brings up the VSH menu. We already went through that, and holding home while you turn it on will boot our PSP into official firmware mode. Holding start while powering on, resetting, or booting a game will turn off all the plugins. Doing the same thing with the select button will disable the settings on ARK-4. Holding L while turning it on will boot the classic recovery menu, and holding L will boot into DC-ARK. And I believe we are reaching the end, and my notes here are telling me something and I'm not exactly sure what it is. Please, whatever you do, stop calling your custom firmware PSP a jailbroken PSP. The iPhone came after the PSP. You can call it a hacked PSP or preferably a modded PSP, but whatever you do, not a jailbroken PSP. That's just cringe. Please stop using the J word, and I think everyone will get along just fine. Now, there are two things I'm going to go over real quick that you can find in the ARK-4 zip file, and one of them would have to be final speed. And what this is a little mod that will add a shortcut to your home screen to the ARK loader, replacing either the SenseMe or the Comic app. It's for those who want to run their PSP in official firmware mode by default, but occasionally want to dabble into custom firmware. To be honest, I don't see the point in it, but here it is. And you can play around with it and then restore everything back to normal. For example, we'll do the SenseMe, and here's what that looks like when you replace one of the apps. And the other thing I want to go over would have to be the 1.50 kernel add-on. And what this will allow you to do is to run old legacy homebrew that was meant for the 1.50 custom firmware. And yes, the majority of you are not going to need this. However, one very prominent app that is feature-packed, and unfortunately we still don't have the source code for, would have to be IRShell. And that thing is absolutely ancient, but it's also absolutely amazing with the features that it has. And as far as compatibility, it's been said that everything works perfectly fine except for some features of IRShell. It's still not 100% perfect, they're still working on it, but it's pretty damn close. And I should mention that this only works on PSP 1000 models. Oh yeah, remember that infrared sensor? Yeah, well, IRShell lets you use that as a remote control. And to install it, other than copying the file over to your PSP from the ARK-4 zip file that we installed at the beginning of the video, you'll need yourself a copy of the 1.50 official firmware that you'll place in the root of your memory card and rename it to 150.pbp. Once you do that, you go ahead and run it, you hit X, and it'll do its thing. Now once you finish installing it and copying your files over to the Game 150 folder, there are two possible issues that you may encounter. One of them is memory cards. None of my SD cards or SD card adapters worked with anything related to the 1.50 kernel. My original 1GB Sony did work, as well as my 16GB Lexar. However, my 8GB Sony did not. So my best advice is to try all the card combinations that you have. Memory stick Pro Duos or SD cards, try them all and see what works. And for the best compatibility, make sure you run the new CIPL, and that's about it for the 1.50 kernel add-on. Now there's actually one more thing, and I wasn't going to cover it in this video as it still requires some thorough testing, but that one thing can be found in the ARK full installer. And what it is the FATMS 371 mod. This is an old mod that was created many years ago, designed to boost the speed of your PSP's memory card access. And according to my testing, which at the moment isn't a whole lot, in some instances it saves about 1 to 2 seconds, in others there's absolutely no change, and some very specific use cases, specifically in NZ Portable, load times have been increased drastically. So I'm not sure what's going on there. Maybe it needs some more patching, maybe I need to do some more testing. Either way, this is what we know so far. But one thing for sure is that I'm going to definitely have a follow-up to the storage maxing video, so stay tuned. And the final feature that I want to showcase here would have to be under the extras section. So let's go ahead and scroll down. And right here, we'll see that we have custom app, which is something that we didn't have before. And this is kind of a hidden feature that was only told by Craziness, which is one of the developers, where you can go ahead and create a shortcut to whatever homebrew that you want. Now the functionality currently is kind of limited, so you can't really rename it, change the icon, nor can you actually run any PS1 games. So if you do have yourself a favorite homebrew that you'd like to have in this shortcut, well, go ahead and plug in your PSP, open up your computer, and navigate through PSP, App, Custom, and right here you can drop all the contents of whatever homebrew that you'd like. Which in our case, we got our button tester, so let's go ahead and launch it. And it starts right up like any other homebrew. Pretty cool. So at this point, I'm done talking about all the different features that I could talk about when it comes to ARK-4. And now we're at a point where you may have some questions that could be answered by the history of ARK-4. Why is it so feature-packed? Why is the custom launcher so nice? Well, here's why. Despite the pretty recent release of 2021, this story starts in the early days of the PS Vita modding scene. ARK started out as a custom firmware port that was more like a full rewrite of Pro custom firmware to the PS Vita, named Pro Vita. It was originally created by Team Pro members Coldbird, Liquid Snake, and Neuron, and after the original team left, the source code of Pro Vita was handed over to Acid Snake and his longtime scene friend, QuickRazor87, where they quickly began the process of rewriting and reconstructing the code to specifically have a more robust dynamic patching algorithm that would work with any 6.6x based firmware, including all Vita's ePSP firmwares, and this is where ARK-2 was born. Soon after, Quick, The Flow, and Acid Snake began working on the PSX exploit, which resulted in TNX and ARK-3 projects, which were never publicly released. So yeah, Pro Custom firmware was basically bloated, hard to work with, it's old code, and basically it hasn't been maintained for a long while. So Acid Snake started working on the porting ARK to the PSP, and making it compatible with both 6.60 and 6.61, with very minimal changes, since the core elements of the ePSP custom firmware are compatible with the PSP. And after a lot of work porting everything over, the first release of ARK-4 came about in 2021. So if you're like me, looking at the custom launcher and wondering, why is there some redundant stuff? Well, it turns out that the custom launcher was originally made on the Vita, and that's why it's so feature-packed. It came out at a time where it needed it, and that's why it had those features. If you're interested in reading more about this, I'll leave a link for it in the description down below. It's on the official ARK-4 wiki page, all the way here in history and credits. And if you check out the spreadsheet, I'll have a little extra information, since I did talk to Acid Snake, and he gave me a couple more details that I'm sure if you're interested in the history of it, you'll enjoy reading it. So they basically took the Pro Custom firmware for the PSP, ported it over to the Vita, rewrote the code, packed it with features, and then was ported back to the PSP, essentially coming full circle. Now at this point you're probably asking, where did the name ARK come from? Well, although it was originally called Pro Vita, right before release, it was decided that it was going to be called ARK, named after a private forum website. So that's where it came from. And if you guys made it this far, well, I've got a little something for you. And that is in the form of an all-in-one package that you can drop in your PSP and have some of my favorite plugins, plus some extra goodies, all set up and ready to go. Now this is going to be version 1 of the release, and at some point I might have a dedicated video about it in the future, so let me quickly show you how to install it, then I can go ahead and quickly showcase what's inside of it. So for the last time in this video, go ahead and plug in your PSP, head on over to the spreadsheet, and flip to the PSP drop-in package tab. Inside, you'll find a link, so go ahead and download it, and once you're done that, go ahead and open up the zip file, and copy over everything that you see to the root of your memory card. And at this point, I highly insist that you go over the README Now file, as it holds some very important information that you definitely want to go over if you're using this package, and at the same time, you can go over the source links where you can learn more about each of these plugins and all their other various features and configurations. I pretty much bundled all my favorite plugins that work with each other with the least amount of problems. And I can't believe I'm saying this, guys, but we are finally at the end of the video. And man, oh man, has it been a ride. Because this video has been in the making for about 4 months now. The project folder is nearing 700 gigabytes, and we're probably going to surpass it because I still have some fixes to do in this video, things I want to go over. And as always, I feel like this video could have been a whole lot better, but you know how it is, time constraints, work, life, it's not always that easy. So why did it take so long? Well, ARK-4 is just so feature-packed that there's a lot to go through, and I can't talk about something until I personally tried it, which I have done on multiple PSP models, and you know what? We did face a whole lot of problems in the process, which we actually got fixed. So it made ARK-4 in the end a whole lot better. Speaking of making it better, special thanks to Craziness for helping out with this video. Without him, you know, I would be underwater. Basically, every time I found an issue or something that wasn't clear, I would basically bug him and he'd help out. The real MVPs are really the developers themselves, because giving the PSP some proper software support in 2024 is nothing short of amazing. So, I think that's pretty much it. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask in the comment section below. Find me on Discord. And hopefully this video was helpful and relatively easy to understand. Almost fell there. And of course, if you have stuck around to the end of this video, well, thank you so much for watching. Hope you have enjoyed it, learned something new, and yeah, that is all for this video. Now we can finally go back to some hardware mods, and boy am I excited, because I've got some very fun ideas cooking up, and I can't wait to start working on them and showing you guys what I have in mind. And with all that being said, that is all for this video. So thank you all for watching. If you have enjoyed this video and found it helpful, hit the like button and subscribe for more content like this, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care, everyone.